joining us today for the Senate Education Committee meeting. Committee, we're going to do a couple of things today, and what I want us to start off with is it's quite obvious with the questions that we had yesterday with regard to Senate Bill 455 that there are some issues that we are wanting to kind of talk through and to see if our we need to be able at this point in time to give our revisers some time to come up with amendments. And so I thought it was important if we just kind of take a little pause and we talk about which areas of SB 455 we feel are needing to have some attention. And I think I would like to go ahead and start with Senator Dietrich. She's going to say, me. But Senator Dietrich, if you would just briefly share your prior experience and some issues as to how they resolved, and then that can kind of help us move forward on what Tamara can start working on as far as drafts.
Sure. So when I was a superintendent in Massachusetts, we had a school choice program, and it was among our public schools. And so school districts, if they had the capacity based on their student-teacher ratio, would agree to admit students from outside the district, but it was on a lottery basis. And so, like, let's say you had 4 openings in 4th grade, then you would collect applications. You would never look at the name because it was supposed to be completely unbiased. So you would then, through whatever process was applicable to your district, if you had 19 4th graders that applied, but you only had room for 4, you just select 4 names out of this, let's say, basket, and those were the 4 that would then be able to attend school in the district. So, and the one thing I will tell you is that, and this was the question I was asking yesterday, once you agreed to accept that student, they were yours until they graduated, unless they were expelled for some reason. And you got the state funding, and transportation was up to the parents. What happened most often is they would either drop the child off at school themselves, or they would go to the nearest bus stop, and then we would pick them up and bring them to school. So it worked out pretty well. The only complaints we ever had were from parents who lived in the district who felt that those students were taking up resources that, you know, that they had paid for themselves. But it worked really well K-8. It got a little dicey at the high school level, only because if those out-of-district students became the star of the football team or the lead in the musical, then there was a little heartburn there. But they were ours. They were our students and our families. So it was up to the school district as to capacity. So, you know, and there was no appeal process either. I mean, you either, if their names, if they applied and their names were selected, we didn't know who they were given the opportunity to enroll. If they declined, then you went to the next student on the list. So it worked out well. We never had any issues at all.
Okay, so share with us, was there a cut time as far as when they needed to apply?
Yes, there was a date at which you had to, and I'm trying to remember back, it's been 19 years, but I believe it was like July 1, because school started middle of August, and you had to make sure that you had all the pieces in place for them. And so apply by July 1.
Was there a basic application?
Yes.
Simply, this is
yes,
the name and age of the child, this is the district that they attended. And
there was an agreement that if selected, they would attend and abide by all the rules and policies of the school district. Very simple form, easy to fill out, didn't even have to be notarized. We just trusted that the parent had filled out the form.
So I do want you to give some consideration as to what amendments you would like to bring. With regard to the audit, so I know that this 455 is very specific, that there be an audit of 10% every year. Now our auditors are here today, correct me, I think there are only 2 other areas where audits are done on an annual basis. Please do come forward.
Thank you, Senator Baumgartner. Excuse me, Chris Clark, Legislative Post Auditor. We do have 2 areas that we have ongoing audits. I'll speak to a few more. Every 3 years, we have to do an audit of capers, any topic, just something involving capers. Every 5 years, we have to do an audit of the E911 system. And then statutorily, we do have school audits every year, but the topic is different each year. Next year is at risk or next year is virtual, the year after that is at risk, that sort of thing. So a provision like this, that we audit the same thing every year, is very unusual.
Okay. Senator Petty.
So along that same line of audits, when you talked about the school audits, are those the audits that were spoken to in the legislation?
Yes.
So we had put those in the, 3 years ago?
There was a schedule for those
And there's a
audits.
schedule, it's basically one topic a year. One year we have two, but it's special ed, virtual, at risk, a new topic each year.
So,
Petty.
Madam Chair, I think I do recall, I think it was when we had the block grants that we did, was it with block grants that we had the schedule, we had that scheduling that we did so many of a small district, so many of medium-sized districts. So
That used to just be an occasional, that wasn't a part of block grants. At the time that we had block grants, we had those, but no, it was an occasional, and JG probably remembers, where they would randomly pick, those school districts could volunteer to have the audit, and it was more about efficiency.
Right.
But it wasn't just because of block grants. It was an ongoing process.
But we had put that in legislation for a period of time. Am I correct? Okay, thanks.
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear what our revisor said.
The small, medium, and large audits to which Senator Petty is referring was a statutory requirement that was repealed.
Okay, all right. So I guess I'm a little curious, from your standpoint, representing legislative post-audit, the type of audit of the 10%, how would that be different from the audit that's done by the Department of Education on transportation funds and I think the enrollment numbers?
You would have to ask Department of Education that, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
But those are done on an annual basis. They audit the head count and they audit transportation. So I guess I'm wondering if we need to, I think at this point, we need to find out, so if legislative research could find out from the Department of Ed specifically about those two audits, because I think those are done annually, what their capacity would be to do the 10% audits. And then if that's something that they are unable to do, I think that we need to, I can't see doing it annually. Right now, I'm thinking split the difference between the Q3 and Q5 year and make it every 4 years to see how that's working. I have a feeling that if there are problems with this, with the implementation of Senate Bill 455, we'll be hearing it from school districts as well as parents. Committee, any other things? So Tamara, I will ask you to prepare an amendment for every 4 years. Are there any other things that Tamara can get started on with regard to specifically Senate Bill 455? Senator Dietrich.
So part of the concern that I had was on, besides the audit, was, oh, I've just lost it again. I looked over. I think the transportation thing we can fix, because if it's folks being able to just drop their child off at the nearest bus stop, then that kind of takes care of some of that transportation issue, and that's what most districts do now anyway. Oh, I know what it was. It was the process of appealing to the state board, because that will take too long, and you don't want to interrupt a child's, educational process. So I just think that appeal, and you don't want to see the State Board of Education, slammed with, 347 applications that were denied. So I think there's got to be a better process.
Okay. Senator Erickson, and then
Thank-
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just like to say that since Senator Dietrich has had firsthand experience with this, has seen what works, I am completely in support of her suggestions and would be happy to work with her on either striking the appeal process or coming up with another way that's more workable. Happy to do that, but I agree and support her suggestions. If it's worked, let's see how it does here in the state of Kansas and go from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that offer. So can you let me know before the end of the day, do you think you might be able to come with perhaps kind of an outline of some changes? Could you?
Yes, that would not, Madam Chair, that would not be difficult to do. It's just we can't bring any other groups in to help us with this very quickly. It would just be us.
I think we all know how to contact people that came and testified, so I think some of that would be pretty easy to kind of run some things by. But I understand, you're not going to get all groups involved, but we certainly know how to get a hold of Mr. Tallman. We know we've got Mr. O'Neill here today. So I think that we can get kind of a jump start on some of those issues. One other ask of legislative research, could you please reach out to Keisha and address that particular issue of what is their current regulation with regard to a student participating in competitive from middle school on to high school. I can only hearken back to about 10 years ago, and they were redshirted for a year, or if it was basketball that straddles the 2 semesters, they had to redshirt for the fall semester but could play in the spring. But it's entirely possible that there's been a change to that. So we do need to know how that would impact for students to simply know you can come to a new school, but it doesn't mean you can compete. And that would also be true for co-curricular activities such as debate, forensics, choir, band, because they do compete throughout the year. And so same regulations. It used to be the very same regulations, so we need to get a clarification on that. And I don't think it's so much, we have no say over CASA regulations. I think it's, we want to make sure if we go into this transition, that parents know what the parameters are, at least in existence right now with CASA. Real quick question, just trying to get, I think this would be helpful to both senators that are working on this. So is there a comfort level with the 4 different times per year that the kids could come in? Or what is your feel from a committee standpoint? Do you want one time in the fall, one time in the spring? Senator Petty, you had your hand up.
So, Madam Chair, that was an issue that I wanted to mention, and I actually think that looking at simpler is better, and so one time in the fall. And as Senator Dietrich had mentioned, and I had mentioned to you earlier, you know, a process of having them start the year seems to be much more academically and well, also it's school districts, you know, have a way of looking at what's our enrollment going to be like and can projections, and it does make it much more difficult if you have multiple times during the year. So I certainly think that looking at it on a one-time basis and that provides for a lot of uniformity as well.
I think sometimes for middle school and high school, because they are so much fall and spring schedule driven, schedules tend to shift, if not quarterly, but by semester. So I think even starting in a January wouldn't necessarily be too difficult for the students. Yes, definitely. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to see a little bit of middle ground simply because I know of the mobility issues and the issues that can come up during the school year. For example, bullying or something like that, that would just, I agree there needs to be some reasonable parameters. I would like to see maybe like once a semester, like fall and and spring semester, just for those reasons, a little bit more flexibility and for those reasons. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Now I forgot what I was going to ask Senator Diedrich. I think it's been a long week, and so we're all tired. And we'll be in a great position come Monday when we have one less hour, right? Yeah. You're welcome. I gave you a warning. It's better to hear it now than over the weekend. Senator Sykes.
Yeah, so my apologies because I was not here yesterday, but my question, and maybe this is for Senator Dietrich, as you're looking at what you did in Massachusetts with the sibling, and especially if we're looking at different dates in which they can enroll, because I could think that could be, if there's a family of 3 and they're all wanting to transfer, but the space. So can you comment about how they dealt with siblings?
Madam Chairman, so
Yes.
as I recall, if you're the oldest child in the family and you've been accepted and there was room in the other grade levels, then the entire family could come in. But it really does depend on capacity, and it's the elementary level is your pupil-teacher ratio. But what often happened if it was the oldest child and they were in 2nd grade and they didn't have school-age level children yet that were younger, then they would follow. So you just had to keep that in mind.
Okay. I did think of what it was with regard to capacity. So was it individual school districts that set capacity?
Madam Chair, it was, because every district has a different pupil-teacher ratio, and their classrooms are different sizes, especially I'm thinking of the elementary age, or if it's a lab, setting at a high school, you do have to be. I think it's unique to each school district.
And the last question that I have has to do with those districts that have multiple elementary, multiple middle, and perhaps multiple high schools. So did the parents get to pick which elementary or which middle or which high school?
They could choose, but if the capacity was not in that building, then we could not meet that request. I mean, that really was the issue.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, I'd like to have a question for Senator Diedrich.
Absolutely.
My question is, usually when we speak of parent-teacher ratios, we speak in terms of a building.
Yes.
So when you're speaking in terms of a grade level, because often in a building, it includes the paras, the resource teachers, the librarian, et cetera. Could you address that?
So when we were defining this, it was your teacher in the classroom. That really was the capacity.
That makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Okay. I think this is good movement. I appreciate this conversation. I think it's important. We are going to work this bill. So if the two of you, if you can't work all the way through it by Monday, that's okay. But if you can come with very specific recommendations, we can get those then to the reviser. So if you can come with what I think would be preliminary conceptual recommendations by Monday, we just have Tuesday, Wednesday, right. So we're running out of time, but we can make this happen as long as we get a start. So if we can get that and then think through what that final follow-up, so that we can really work it and finish it up, I'm hoping by Wednesday or Thursday next week. I mean, we really do need to get it out of committee so it can then be read in. But certainly, we'll get that information from legislative research. As soon as you have it, if you'll make sure to just get it to our assistant, she'll make sure that Senator Dietrich and Erickson get it first, hot off the press, and then everyone else will get it, and we'll just keep moving forward. I think we need to continue working this, and each day if we can get a couple steps further. So please continue to think about it. If you come up with some ideas, concerns, interests, could we do something like this? Make sure that you get it to our two senators. So thank you for that leadership. I think the last time we did that cooperative approach on the school assessments, it was very successful. So let's continue with that. Thank you for that. Committee, you were sent a series of minutes. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes? I do from Senator Erickson, second from Senator Dietrich. Is there any conversation? Nope. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. At this time, we'll have a briefing on legislative post-audit, evaluating the need for developmental education courses. So I welcome our auditor, Heidi Zimmerman. Thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to present this audit. It is a limited scope audit looking at the need for developmental education courses in college. The question is on page 1. It is, what do stakeholders say about why developmental courses in college are necessary? The short answer to that question is that stakeholders reported many reasons that students might need developmental education courses, including having been out of school for an extended period of time, a lack of parental support at home, and inappropriate coursework in high school. So first, I'm going to go through just a little bit of background information on what developmental education courses are, and then I'll provide some more details to the audit question. So technical colleges, community colleges, and universities offer developmental education courses because some college students are unprepared in the core areas of math, reading, or writing to succeed in college. Most colleges and universities offer math and writing developmental courses, but a few also offer reading courses. These courses typically cover material that is covered in high school. Community colleges and technical colleges identify students who need developmental education courses a little differently than how universities do it. Community colleges and technical colleges administer a standardized math and English test called the AccuPlacer to all incoming students. And students who score below a certain threshold on that test must take a developmental course. Board of Regents staff, though, told us that some colleges are also starting to consider things like high school grades and SAT and ACT scores in making that determination. Universities, though, typically do not administer the AccuPlacer, and they only look at measures like high school GPA and SAT and ACT scores. Students are charged tuition for these developmental courses, but they do not earn college credit towards their degree for taking them. Board of Regent officials also reported that about half of Kansas post-secondary institutions offer courses called co-requisite math or English courses. They typically offer those with or sometimes instead of traditional developmental courses. These courses also serve students who are not prepared for regular college-level work. A co-requisite course, though, places students directly into the college-level course and then provides some additional classroom supports. The course typically covers both remedial material and the regular college-level work, but they offer some additional support. So, for example, a co-requisite math course might be 5 hours instead of the traditional 3, and those extra hours would allow the teacher to provide some remedial instruction and also to pace the class more slowly. Unlike traditional developmental courses, co-requisite courses allow students to earn college credit. So colleges and universities, though, identify students for co-requisite classes in the same way that they identify them for traditional developmental education courses. For the remainder of my presentation, though, I'm going to refer to both traditional developmental courses and co-requisite courses just as developmental education courses. We also looked at the number of students who took developmental education courses. So in the 2020 school year, a little more than 11,000 Kansas high school graduates were enrolled in at least one developmental education course. We do think that number, though, is probably a little understated. That's because older students who may have graduated more than 15 years ago may not have been included in that count. Additionally, several colleges and universities that offer co-requisite courses do not report them as developmental, so that number is likely just a little bit understated. I would also like to note here just a little more about what this number is, and it is just a snapshot of the number of students who took developmental education courses in 2020. So if you're trying to understand what percentage of students needed to take developmental education courses, This number isn't going to quite get you there, and that's because it's only counting students who took a developmental education course in 2020. So if a student took a developmental education course in 2019, obviously they needed to take a developmental ed course, but they wouldn't be counted here. So due to some time constraints, because this is just a limited scope audit, we weren't able to quite dig into that number. But we do have some more details about the 11,000 students who took these courses in 2020. And the figure on page 4 shows some of those details. The students aged 17 to 19 represent the largest group of students who enrolled in at least one developmental course in 2020. About 41% of the students were aged 17 to 19, which indicates that about 41% of those students were recent high school graduates. Additionally, 34% of the students were aged 20 to 24, and then the remaining 25% were 25 years old or older. So next, I'm going to get into the details of the audit answer. And so to answer this audit question, we sent 2 surveys. The first survey went to 342 post-secondary developmental education instructors. 144 of them responded for a survey response of 42%. And given that response rate, we do think the results are reasonably representative. We asked instructors to report how significant several factors are in a student's need to take a developmental education course. On page 5, the figure there provides the details of that survey. And as you can see in that figure, 63% reported that the length of time that a student has been out of high school is a significant factor. Almost 50% reported that not being a native English speaker is also a significant factor in the need for developmental education courses. Instructors also reported some additional opinions about the need for developmental courses. Other reported reasons were that students may need to take these courses because of a poor home life, a lack of maturity in high school, or a lack of a well-rounded education in the earlier grades. Many also told us that developmental education courses are necessary to maintain broad access to college. One respondent wrote that developmental education opens a door to better education and quality of life for so many who would otherwise be shut out. The second survey that we sent went to almost 12,000 high school teachers, principals, and guidance counselors. About 1,500 of them responded for a response rate of just 14%. Because of the very low response rate, the results may not be representative of the larger group. But we asked staff to provide their opinions on the reasons why recent high school graduates are sometimes unprepared for college. The figure on the bottom of page 6 shows the survey results. As you can see in that figure, 69% of respondents reported that a lack of educational support at home was a significant factor. And a similar percentage reported that students receiving passing grades in high school without mastering course content was also a significant factor. High school staff reported some additional opinions as well. Many respondents told us that academic expectations were too low in high school. One teacher wrote, "It's not hard to pass with a 60%. That does not, however, make a student college ready." Many also noted that students are struggling with basic skills when they get to high school. One teacher wrote, "Students are being socially promoted in elementary schools and do not learn basic concepts." We also spoke with several post-secondary and K-12 stakeholders about their opinions on why developmental education courses are necessary. Every person that we spoke to told us that a lack of appropriate high school coursework was an important contributor. More specifically, many of the stakeholders noted that students often do not take enough math courses in high school. And some noted that students may change their minds about their post-high school plans. That can result in students deciding too late to take the courses that would prepare them for college. A few stakeholders also mentioned some other factors. Some noted that students who have been out of high school for a long period of time were more likely to need developmental courses. Additionally, a few thought that lowering college admission standards may also contribute. They thought that students may no longer feel the need to be prepared for college because they are likely to be admitted regardless. Last, as part of the survey and our interviews with stakeholders, we asked about actions that could improve college readiness and reduce the need for developmental education courses. The figure on page 9 shows how significant of an impact survey respondents rated various actions that could reduce the need for developmental courses. 73% of high school staff thought that requiring skills mastery before passing students would have a significant impact on improving college readiness. 69% of post-secondary respondents reported that providing additional education supports in high school would have a significant impact. A little more than half of high school staff also thought that that would have a significant impact. Nearly all of the stakeholders we talked to thought that more communication with students about what courses they should take in high school would be helpful. Many of them thought that more guidance counseling could help students better connect their high school courses to their post-high school plans. We didn't make any recommendations in this audit. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
We'll start with Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all the great information. Was it looked at, I would assume that it's difficult to hire high school math teachers that are able to teach math in a variety of different ways to meet different student needs. Was that looked at as the difficulty that high schools have in hiring math teachers?
No, we didn't look at this issue or that issue. This audit was just gathering opinions on why why developmental ed courses are needed.
Okay, and one more question on the language skills and reading abilities. I think in part of your testimony you talked about where English is not their native language. Did this identify how many students were exchange students or here on athletic scholarship, or how many students were, native English speakers?
No, we didn't cut the data in that way. So we did ask the Board of Regents for some data, and based on that, there are a little more than 11,000 students, Kansas high school graduates, who took a developmental ed course in 2020. But other than the information provided in the report, we don't have any other characteristics on them.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you for being here. My question, I know some schools, the school my kids go to, trying to make sure kids are mastering those skills. So they may have a session or a chapter of the book that they have for a week. And if they have homework assignments daily, they're graded, but they can kind of go back and do some cleanup on those, trying to master those skills. Was any of that looked at about maybe some schools who did that, and if those students were prepared better than kids who they were not really focusing on that mastery of trying to make sure that kids had opportunities? I mean, we can't make kids do things. I try a lot, but there is a lot more opportunity, I think, in the way curriculum in the classrooms that some districts are doing. Was that looked at all?
We didn't look specifically at that. Again, we were just trying to gather opinions. I can say that there were a lot of responses, especially in the high school survey, from teachers and other staff who commented frequently on the lack of mastery, that students are socially promoted, students are passed, especially in high school, just because the school district or the state or whoever they felt was in charge had put in a lot of emphasis on graduation rates, and that overwhelmed everything. And so mastery wasn't happening because the most important thing was graduation rates, and there was pressure to just pass kids, whether they've learned anything or not, just so they get the credit for the course and they can graduate. There were many comments about that issue and the problem with the lack of mastery that is occurring in high school classrooms.
And so with those comments and responses, was that across the board statewide, or did you see like gaps, or did you notice where that information was coming from?
We didn't collect what district the teachers or staff were from, so we were not able to cut it in that way.
think that would be interesting to see if, because I know some schools are doing more to see if we have a better focus in some areas where they're putting it. Thank you.
I think as a follow-up, I know that the technical colleges, as well as the community colleges, and even the universities who tend to contract with the community colleges to teach the remedial, but they do track down how many are coming from a particular district or a particular school. So they would be able to provide that on an individual basis. Senator Erickson and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for the report. Quick question, I don't know that this was within the scope of the audit, but did you do anything based on the cost, what the cost of remedial courses or developmental courses are to the state?
That was not part of this audit scope. So no, we didn't look at that.
Okay. I would like some information, Madam Chair, on what those courses cost, who pays for them. Back in my day, it was usually the student or the family had to pay for those. And my follow-up to that is the co-requisite courses. Is that the same thing? Does the student pay for those, or are those eligible to be paid for through other means? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't think in the context of this audit you would have that answer, but we do actually have Heather Morgan, who's here, Executive Director of Kansas Association of Community College Trustees. And so unless Heidi, did you want to take a jump at that question?
That audit, or that question just wasn't part of the scope of this audit.
So I think that I'm seeing from the nonverbal that you have some answers. So let's go ahead and let's address that now.
You may remember this summer there was an interim.
The process of introducing yourself, even though I just introduced.
Heather Morgan, KACCT. You may remember this summer there was an interim committee about this, and the K Board provided some information. At that time, it using just the cost model. So we're not going to get into the tiered and non-tiered cost model, but just putting the developmental courses through that cost model. The calculation was in academic year 2020 that the developmental cost for community colleges was 8.2 million, state universities was 1.2 million, municipal universities was 162,000, and then technical colleges 340,000 for a total of 9.9 million. So to your point about who pays, the state pays and the student pays. The difference between a remedial, true developmental course versus a co-requisite course would be about 2 hours. So if you're in developmental, like intermediate math as a developmental math course, that's going to be like a 3-hour course. And if you're in college algebra co-requisite remediation course, that's going to be a 5-hour course where normally it would have been 3. So you're going to pay for 2 extra hours for that tutoring on that Tuesday and Thursday around the co-requisite course. So there is definitely some costs to this.
So go ahead and stay up there. Talk about the difference between how you pay for remedial versus how a student pays for remedial versus what their options are for the co-curricular.
You mean co-requisite?
Or co-requisite, I'm sorry. I'm still thinking of debate and forensics, sorry.
So the developmental courses, are you talking about Pell Grant? I got to have a little more lead here.
as well as loans.
Right. So there may be developmental courses that are not in a degree path that the person may or may not be able to use FAFSA to complete. So you may or may not qualify for Pell. So that could be out of pocket. And there are Pell Grant maximums. So when a student has to take a 5-hour class instead of a 3-hour class, if they've hit their Pell Grant maximum, they're going to have some other costs. And so then those other costs are going to shift onto loans. And so when we think about what's in your degree path, not having co-requisite remedial courses lengthens time to degree. That's bad for 2 reasons. 1, you're going to run out of federal financial aid, but 2, you're not getting into the workforce to start earning your salary as quickly. And we know that the developmental courses are not as good as co-requisite because there's a lot more failure rates when students are taking developmental courses versus co-requisite, because co-requisite, you're moving towards what you came here to do and to get your certificate or to get your degree, whereas developmental, you can't even get into that pathway of moving to your degree until you complete that developmental class.
I think just off the top of my head, when Dr. Flanders has come to testify from the Board of Regents, if you take the developmental course, there's only a 25% probability that you'll complete it and move forward. For those that complete and move forward, I think only about 50% of them ever finish up in that degree or certificate path.
It's not good. We've gone to a system of what we call multiple measures. So previously, you had to score a certain thing on a test, and that was the only thing schools looked at. We've started looking at GPA, the AccuPlacer, and also ACT scores sort of in combination. So generally, if you have a student who's willing to learn and really does not have significant gaps, but they can work hard and figure it out, we've been able to do well with those, but the range of developmental of skills is also something that's a little bit difficult. Are you a little bit behind, or are you a lot behind? And we have these students that are all in that spectrum, and so we try to get everybody up to speed on degree path as quick as possible.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that kind of reminded me when you said you look at GPA and some of those other things. We know grade inflation is an issue. It would be very interesting to see the GPA and grades of students who take developmental courses to see the correlation between grade inflation and the issue with this as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to just kind of tag on what you just said. And if you guys look on page 9, the very first bar, the question that was posed is, in your opinion, how much impact would the following actions have on improving college readiness? And this came from high school staff. 73% said there would be a significant impact if they required skills mastery before passing a student. So that really does lend itself to this notion of the grade inflation.
The other thing I just wanted to add, and I don't know, this is like the third time that Heidi and I have spent together on this, so I don't know if she said it today or not. But one of the other issues is, if a student takes 3 years of high school math and they don't take it their senior year, and then they start taking that math class at college, they may have had the skills mastery at the high school, but now it's been a year since they've taken math. And so with the graduation task force at ks.gov, that 4 years of math is really important, especially for our healthcare students. We're seeing nursing students who maybe didn't take 4 years of math, and then they can't pass pharmacological calculations because they've had that gap. So the course, the K-12 school might have done their job, but because they didn't take that 4 years of math, they've forgotten by the time they get to us. And so that's another complication.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we will go to Senator Petty.
Okay, so this has long been a concern of mine, having taught in high school, been very familiar with this, is the sense that senior year is a free year. In no other way do we gear up to launch somebody, and they have basically senior year's a play year. That we've got to change that mindset. That ought to be one of the most rigorous years, not the year to goof off. So if we can somehow work on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Send them right on to college, that's what we do. Now, Senator Petty.
I think if Senator Erickson figures that one out, that's right, because that would not be the school, that would also be the individual student's attitude about their senior year. Oh, that's getting off topic. This is for you. I also have one for Heather. I was trying to remember back, you mentioned the 14%, and which group was it? You said something about only 14% response. Which group was that?
The high school survey had a 14% response.
So it was only a 14% response from high school
Principals, teachers, and guidance counselors.
Okay, so
the population.
I think that's lacks for, it's not so consequential when you're talking about only a 14% response. I think that's I'm not blaming them, but I would say it does somewhat color the responses that are here when there's only 40% that are responding. So this might be a question for Heather. When it came to the coursework, and I had flipped back here a couple of times, the co-requisite courses as opposed to just the developmental courses. Heather, on you mentioned like the five credit hours. And would the student be getting 5 credit hours in that co-requisite course?
They would have it transcript as 5 hours, but the course is what is required for the degree pass. So essentially, you would have 2 extra hours you would have paid for. If your whole degree is, let's say your associate's degree is 60 hours, you would have had 62 hours to fulfill your 60-hour requirement.
But 3 hours of that would have been counted towards
The college algebra, let's say.
requirements. And then I'm just asking this question because, and it's a small group, and I don't know, either one of you might be able to answer that. Foreign exchange students, I mean, my experience has been they automatically go to either in developmental or co-requisite courses. Has that changed or?
So I want to make sure we're talking about the same foreign exchange students. If we're talking about an international student at the community college versus a foreign exchange student at the high school, I think that those are two different things.
Talking about the community college.
The international student at the community college, they would take the test, that usually the AccuPlacer, because it's a little harder to look at GPA and test scores. And if they score well enough on the AccuPlacer, they would not have to have developmental, but if they don't score well, they might need that. And so if you look at the audit, I think that post-audit did a really good job of breaking down, is it needed in math or is it needed in language? So an international student might be really, really good at math, but they might need developmental on the English side. So it'll be based upon their test scores. But I think as we think about the demographics of Kansas is changing, we're seeing a lot more English as second language, first generation college students who they may not have been here in the Kansas school system for K through 12. And so they need a little extra remediation.
Thank you.
So committee, we did have a hearing on that. We had the window open for questions to be sent out. Only one question was requested by the committee. That was sent. Cindy, did we receive a response yet? So we haven't received a response yet on that. So committee, are there any, I'd like to open up discussion on Senate Bill 484. Are there any amendments for 484? Or did you want a quick bill overview by our reviser? No, okay. So at this time with discussion, are there any amendments for Senate Bill 484? Okay. Senator Sykes, you have a question.
And thank you. So I don't have an amendment, and I think everyone knows how I feel about this bill, but in last year's bill. But in last year's bill, we put in guidelines that then were taken out about actually trying to determine the biological sex and giving guidelines for Acacia. And I feel in this bill, and as much as I hated that, I'm just going to be honest, but in this bill, we don't have that. So we're giving Acacia the authority to figure out how they're going to determine whether or not someone is their biological sex. So I know there are children who are born and we don't know whether they're male or female at that time, and a parent makes that decision, and when they're 5 or 6, they could possibly change that. So if a birth certificate is changed when they start maturing, is that something to, I mean, we had genital inspections and the other, we're throwing this to someone else without trying to give them guidelines. So I don't know if it's, that birth certificate at birth, that's what we're using as the guideline, or is there something else? So I would appreciate some discussion just to help clarify.
Okay, and I think the representation of what was in the bill last year, that wasn't in the bill that passed out of committee last year. That was taken out. It's always been a requirement to participate in CASHA. A medical document needs to be, there's a CASHA form for a physical, has to be signed by a physician. I don't see that as changing. At least to participate in a CASHA activities, that must be turned in.
Well, so if I may, so if a student is seeing a doctor and they are changed their birth certificate and they bring that forward, would we be saying that they are a female and they would be able to participate if that birth certificate and that medical form presented by the doctor is what Keisha receives?
Okay, I've never known of a birth certificate being required for CASHA. The only time birth certificate's been required is in club sports, and that's to determine the age. Because we do have parents that cheat and allow an older child to play in a younger age group.
Well, I guess maybe this is just my question, because we do have club sports in there, and if it's birth certificates for there and it's a medical, I don't know what our guidelines are for the physician, if there's changes and that's accepted, or if it's from the moment of birth.
Okay. Senator Erickson, would you like to address that question?
Sure. My understanding, and Tamara can jump in here if I'm wrong, is it is the biology of the child at birth is what determines their eligibility in this bill.
Senator Petty, did you have a question or a comment?
I guess it's a combination of that one thing. I'm just,
Let's start with the question.
okay. So the question deals with, and Senator Sykes caused me to think about this. So when it says in the bill, the Kansas State High School Athletics Association shall adopt rules and regulations for its member schools for the implementation of this section. So I'm under the understanding that they already have rules in place to deal specifically with this. So what they have now is that, does that meet these guidelines?
We'll call on the reviser.
I can't speak to Keisha's current guidelines or any potential guidelines that they might adopt based on the passage of this bill.
Okay. Senator O'Shea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This came up a little bit last year when we were on the floor. I don't know if people remember, but I put the documents for the physical evaluation form that Keisha currently uses, and it has lots of questions about male and female, asks about menstrual periods, it asks about testicles for males. So there's lots of pieces on that they already have been using for years.
Senator Straub?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm not as familiar with that form. I'd like to take a look at that. But are there any guidelines concerning doping or medications currently under CASHA guidelines?
I can't speak to CASHA on that, and we haven't had anyone testify from CASHA.
I just would assume that if a student was trans either direction, that there is some type of hormone therapy or some type of drug treatment that they are undergoing. So that may cause some issues with this also.
Okay. Senator Petty, did you have a comment? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Sykes?
Actually, that question, I guess, brought up more, it's just biology versus anatomy versus hormonal, and do we want to be testing hormone? These are questions which I think we're moving forward, and I know I was talking to a swim mom yesterday with Shawnee Mission East. Their swim team was here, and she was talking about how collegiate they're looking at these issues, but it is testosterone levels and hormone levels and all of those, and we're all different, and just trying to figure out what is the guideline that we're trying to use.
Senator O'Shea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't answer that, but again, this form they've been using for years, it asks if they've been using steroids. and performance-enhancing supplements. So I think those are already things that the doctors who are doing these physical examinations are looking for and looking at and considering.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion on Senate Bill 484? Senator Gossage?
Madam Chair, I move we pass Senate Bill 484 as, I guess it's not amended. Pass Senate Bill 484 out of committee favorably.
Okay, I have a second. I have a second from Senator Erickson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Okay, so I have, okay, so I have two that want to be recorded. So Senator Dietrich, as well as Senator Sykes. Did you want to be recorded, Senator Petty? Okay, but they asked that first, so we're going to deal with that first. So division, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, that's 4. All those opposed? It's 3. So on a vote of 4-3, Senate Bill 484 passes out of committee favorably. Committee, thank you for your work. And if we are here tomorrow, depending on the weather, then we will be working on Senate Bill 528. Meeting adjourned.